Have you ever wondered why the spiritually awakened woman seems to have such an electrifying presence that can either draw a man in or push him away? The kind of woman who without effort seems to make the average man feel inadequate, insecure, or even lost in her presence. It's as if her energy doesn't just fill a room, but it disturbs the very fabric of his identity. But why does this happen? Why does a woman who has connected deeply with herself and her higher purpose seem to destroy the average man? It is not a destruction of her own making. It is the shattering of the illusions he has built around himself. The spiritually awakened woman is a force of nature, a representation of individuation, the Jungian process of becoming whole by integrating the unconscious with the conscious. She has delved deep into the hidden parts of herself, faced the shadows within, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more authentic. She has come to terms with her power, her vulnerability, and her truth. And in doing so, she radiates a quiet yet magnetic energy that forces anyone around her to confront their own truth, whether they are ready or not. Her energy is potent not because she seeks to dominate, but because she stands in her own wholeness. She has detached herself from the need for external validation, from the approval of others. This independence is not born out of ego, but out of a deep understanding that she is enough, not because of how others see her, but because of the strength of her soul. This is precisely where the average man falters when in her presence. His ego, fragile and desperate for external sources of affirmation, cannot reconcile with her unwavering self-sufficiency. Her very existence challenges everything he has built his identity upon. And in this confrontation, he cannot help but feel small, diminished, irrelevant. Jung's concept of the shadow is crucial here. The shadow represents the unconscious aspects of oneself, the parts of us that we repress, deny, or are unaware of. When a man encounters a spiritually awakened woman, he is forced to confront his own shadow. He is confronted by the parts of himself that he has buried, his insecurities, his fear of inadequacy, and his struggle to define himself by external achievements. In contrast, the awakened woman stands as an embodiment of what he has yet to integrate. Her soul is aligned, her energy is pure, and she shows him, often without words, the gaps in his own self-awareness. Her presence forces him to ask, why do I feel this way? What part of myself have I denied or rejected? This disintegration of ego can be so overwhelming that many men choose to retreat rather than face what is being stirred in them. To be near a woman who is spiritually awake is to be forced into a confrontation with one's deepest fears and insecurities. For the average man who has not yet begun the work of individuation, this can be a terrifying experience. He is not ready to face the shadow aspects of himself, and in the presence of a woman who is whole, he feels his own brokenness more sharply. It is not her doing. It is simply her being. She does not have to speak or act in any particular way. Her energy, her vibration exposes everything he has not yet integrated. But this confrontation is not a curse. It is an opportunity for growth, transformation, and self-realization. The problem is, many men who are still enslaved by their egos are not ready for such a confrontation. Instead of embracing the challenge, they either run away or try to manipulate her into fitting their needs. They seek to possess her, to mold her into something more comfortable, something that does not disturb their carefully constructed sense of self. This is the point where the spiritually awakened woman's energy destroys the average man. Not through force, but through her refusal to be manipulated, controlled, or diminished. She will not shrink to fit into his narrow view of what a woman should be. She will not make herself small for the comfort of his ego. The spiritually awakened woman knows that the only way to heal and evolve is through the process of self-exploration and self-acceptance. She has walked through her own darkness and emerged with a deeper understanding of who she is, independent of anyone else's expectations. And when she encounters a man who is not on this journey, who is still struggling with the surface-level distractions of ego and status, there is a disconnect. She is not interested in the games he plays to feel validated. She is not interested in conforming to the standards of what society says she should be. Her essence cannot be boxed in or dimmed. And for the man who does not know how to connect with that essence, he can only feel threatened. The average man, as we will call him here, may have been conditioned to view women through a lens of utility or possession. He may see women as beings to be tamed or controlled, to be won through charm or displays of power. He may have spent his life chasing validation through achievement, through conquest, or through external recognition. But the spiritually awakened woman does not function in the world of ego. She does not chase, she does not compete. She simply is, and that is a force he cannot ignore. In her presence, he is forced to confront everything he has been avoiding. His own insecurities, his lack of inner peace, his inability to stand firm in his own power. To be in a relationship with such a woman requires a man to undergo his own process of individuation. He must let go of the fragile ego that needs constant validation and begin the work of self-discovery. He must be willing to face his shadow, to integrate the parts of himself he has hidden away. And this is not an easy task. Many men are not ready for this transformation. They are not ready to let go of the crutches they have used to prop up their self-worth. For the spiritually awakened woman, this is not her job. Her job is to live in her truth and to offer the mirror to those around her, to challenge them, whether they accept it or not, to become more than they have been. The spiritually awakened woman destroys the average man, not because she seeks to destroy him, but because her wholeness exposes the cracks in his ego that he has been avoiding. And in that exposure lies the opportunity for transformation. But only if he's brave enough to face it. When a man encounters a woman who is spiritually awakened, something within him shifts, but it is not always comfortable. The spiritually awakened woman does not fit into the mold of conventional femininity. She does not seek validation from anyone, let alone from a man. She has long understood that her worth is intrinsic, that she does not need external approval to know who she is. This understanding is what sets her apart, and it is this very quality that unnerves the average man. To the man whose identity is still rooted in ego and status, in external achievements, the spiritually awakened woman represents a mystery he cannot solve. She is not seeking to be won. She is not playing a game of attraction for the sake of validation, and she does not measure herself through the lens of her relationship with him. This can be disorienting for the average man, because in his world, relationships often serve as a means to bolster his self-image. She, however, operates in an entirely different dimension. Her power is not derived from how he sees her, but from how she sees herself. What does it mean when the spiritually awakened woman operates from a place of self-sufficiency, of inner peace, of wholeness? It means that she challenges the very foundations of the average man's ego. His entire sense of self-worth has been built upon the idea that he needs others, especially women, to affirm his value. He has been conditioned by society, by culture, and by his own unconscious fears to seek external validation in the form of admiration, power, and control. But the spiritually awakened woman does not play by these rules. She doesn't need his admiration to feel worthy. She doesn't need his approval to feel validated. And in this difference lies the danger. When she enters his life, she does not ask him to chase her, to win her, or to give her value. Instead, she invites him into a space of authenticity, of deep connection, where she is already whole, and where he is forced to confront his own incompleteness. The awakening she brings is not a passive one. It is an invitation, a challenge to face the shadow aspects of his own psyche, the parts of him that are afraid of vulnerability, of inadequacy, and of true intimacy. It is in this space of confrontation with his inner self that the average man begins to feel threatened. The shadow, as Carl Jung described it, is the collection of repressed parts of our psyche, those traits and qualities we refuse to acknowledge or accept. For many men, the shadow is rooted in the fear of being seen as weak, dependent, or insufficient. The ego's defense mechanisms create a narrative of self-sufficiency, of control, and of dominance. And yet when he encounters the spiritually awakened woman who has already made peace with her vulnerability and inner strength, the facade begins to crumble. Her energy does not demand that he prove himself. It simply invites him to step out of his comfort zone, to shed the persona he has built, and to become a more whole version of himself. But this is where the rub lies. Not all men are ready for this kind of transformation. Not all men are ready to face the fear of their own inadequacies. The average man who still clings to the ego's need for validation may feel immense discomfort in the presence of such a woman. His immediate reaction is to either resist or attempt to control the situation. If he cannot control the interaction, he may retreat. He may try to diminish her, to dismiss her presence, because in her strength he feels the fragility of his own self-image. The man who is still caught in the cycle of ego-driven existence is deeply threatened by a woman who operates from a place of spiritual wholeness, because she holds up a mirror to his deepest insecurities, his unconscious fears, and his unhealed wounds. The spiritually awakened woman does not need to do anything to destroy him. It is the very contrast between their energies that brings destruction to his ego. She does not need to manipulate or control. She does not need to play the game of validation. Her mere presence challenges everything he has built around himself. And this is where the crumbling begins. It is the ego's confrontation with the higher self that leads to a breakdown. But this breakdown is not the end. It is the beginning of a new opportunity for transformation. For the spiritually awakened woman, this is not an opportunity to fix the man. Her role is not to rescue him from his ego, but rather to offer him the possibility of seeing himself more clearly, of stepping into his own truth. Whether or not he accepts this invitation is his choice. But for the average man who is not yet ready for the deep work of self-integration, her presence can feel like a threat. His ego fights against it. His shadow fights against it. He may run or he may stay and attempt to control, but either way, he is confronted by a force greater than himself. The woman who is spiritually awakened destroys the average man not because she intends to harm him, but because her very being invites him to confront everything he has been avoiding. And in this confrontation, his ego can either dissolve, allowing him to rise to meet his true self, or it can remain intact, causing him to retreat and ultimately distance himself from the growth she embodies. The spiritually awakened woman does not need to engage in battle. She does not need to compete or prove her worth. She simply stands in her truth, and in doing so, she becomes a mirror reflecting all the parts of the man that are still hidden. When the average man is faced with the presence of a spiritually awakened woman, he is not just confronted with her. He is confronted with his own limitations, his own fears, and his own potential for transformation. Whether he is willing to face it is up to him. But the invitation once extended is irreversible. The spiritually awakened woman is an embodiment of what the average man has yet to fully understand about himself. She is not a mere reflection of his desires, but a mirror to his soul, reflecting the parts of him that remain dormant or unconscious. Her presence does not merely highlight what is missing in him. It awakens the dormant potential for growth, transformation, and evolution. This is not an easy gift to receive, especially for someone whose identity is still tightly wrapped in the superficial layers of ego. Many men live their lives in a state of distraction, chasing external validation, accumulating achievements, and holding on to ideals of strength and success that are defined by society's standards. They are often so caught up in these external pursuits that they have never been truly confronted with their internal struggles. When a man meets a spiritually awakened woman, he is suddenly forced to face these internal struggles head on. His carefully constructed identity begins to crack and he feels exposed. It is as though she has stripped away the veils that protect him from the uncomfortable truth that there is more to life than what is seen on the surface. This is where the destruction begins. But the destruction is not a violent one. It is subtle, gradual, and deeply transformative. The average man who encounters a spiritually awakened woman will be forced to grapple with his own limitations. He may try to fight it, trying to mold her into something more comfortable for his ego, trying to shape her into something that doesn't challenge his view of himself. But no matter how hard he tries, he will find that her authenticity cannot be contained. It cannot be controlled. And in that helplessness, the ego fractures. Jung spoke of the process of individuation, the journey towards self-realization, where one integrates all aspects of the self, including the shadow. For the spiritually awakened woman, this process is well underway. She has already begun her journey toward wholeness, confronting her own darkness, embracing her vulnerability, and discovering her inner strength. She is whole in a way that many men have yet to experience. And this wholeness is magnetic. It draws the average man in, but it also forces him to see what he has been avoiding in his own life. It is not her purpose to change him, nor is it her duty to help him realize his own worth. Her power lies in the fact that she is. She stands in her truth, independent and complete, inviting him to do the same. But for the man who is still caught in his ego, this invitation is a threat. He is not yet ready to confront the parts of himself that need to be healed, to release the false narratives that define his identity. And this is where his destruction occurs. His ego cannot withstand the presence of a woman who has transcended the need for validation and approval. The more he is exposed to her authentic energy, the more fragile his sense of self becomes. At this point, the average man faces a choice. He can either rise to meet the challenge she presents, to confront his own fears, to let go of his attachment to the ego, and to begin his own journey of transformation. Or he can retreat, distancing himself from her in an attempt to protect his fragile identity. For many, the latter is the easier path. It is easier to reject the invitation to growth than to face the uncomfortable truth that they are not yet whole, that they have not yet begun the work of individuation. For the spiritually awakened woman, this is not her loss. Her journey is one of self-empowerment and inner peace. She is not dependent on anyone else to validate her worth, to define her purpose, or to determine her value. She simply exists in her own truth, and in doing so, she invites others, especially men, to do the same. But for the average man, this is often too much to bear. He may feel inadequate, unworthy, or unready to face the raw, unfiltered truth of who he is. And in his resistance, the destruction occurs. But the destruction is not a finality. It is a beginning. The spiritually awakened woman is not about tearing down. She is about illuminating. She shines a light on the shadows that men and women have long hidden from themselves. And while the process of facing these shadows can be uncomfortable, it is through this confrontation that true growth occurs. If a man is willing to face his own inadequacies, his own fears, his own weaknesses, then he has the potential to transform. But if he is not, he will remain trapped in the surface-level validation of the ego, forever seeking approval from the outside world, forever disconnected from his true self. In this way, the spiritually awakened woman destroys the average man by shattering the illusion of external validation, by forcing him to confront the truth of who he is or who he is not. She does not manipulate him, does not demand that he change, but simply is. And in her authenticity, she offers a mirror that may be painful to look into, but one that holds the key to his own transformation. If he chooses to look, he can begin the journey of healing. But if he turns away, if he remains bound by the ego's need for validation and external approval, the destruction will remain a fracture that can never be healed. In the end, the spiritually awakened woman does not destroy the average man. She offers him the possibility of growth. It is his choice whether he will embrace that possibility or retreat further into the comfort of his own illusions. The spiritually awakened woman's destruction of the average man is not about power or dominance. It is not an act of malice or intention. It is simply the inevitable result of her energy, her being, and her unwavering commitment to her authentic self. She does not manipulate or coerce. She merely embodies the fullness of her essence. And in doing so, she presents an undeniable challenge to the average man's perception of himself. For the spiritually awakened woman, there's a deep understanding that growth does not come through comfort. True transformation occurs when we confront what we are unwilling to see, what we are afraid to confront. And it is in this process of confronting his own limitations, his ego-driven desires, and his need for external validation that the average man faces his destruction, or more precisely, his opportunity for rebirth. It is critical to note that this destruction is not permanent unless he chooses to remain in his ego. The spiritually awakened woman, with her ability to mirror the shadows within, offers him the potential for healing. But healing requires humility, vulnerability, and a willingness to face the parts of ourselves that are often too painful to confront. The woman who stands in her truth can only offer the invitation, but whether the average man accepts it or runs from it is entirely up to him. Imagine then the inner turmoil that arises when a man is confronted with this depth of authenticity. For much of his life, he may have relied on external validation, on achievements, power, and societal approval to prop up his sense of self. His identity has been built on what he has been able to accumulate, achieve, and possess. But the spiritually awakened woman does not need validation, nor does she seek to be possessed. She is not interested in playing the games that the ego creates. She simply is. And in her very existence, she makes it impossible for the average man to continue living in the illusions of his ego without feeling the discomfort of their unraveling. This discomfort can create resistance. He may try to label her, dismiss her, or manipulate her into fitting into a box that makes sense to him. He may attempt to dominate her, control her, or diminish her power. But in doing so, he reveals the very fragility of his ego. The spiritually awakened woman will not be controlled. She will not shrink to make him feel secure. She will not become less than she is to accommodate his limitations. This is where the destruction occurs. His ego cannot withstand her strength. Her authenticity forces him to see his own inauthenticity, his own fragility, and this dissonance becomes unbearable. But the destruction is not a loss for the spiritually awakened woman. She does not need to destroy him for her own growth. Her power does not come from making others feel small. It comes from standing fully in her own truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might make others feel. She does not create destruction out of spite, but rather out of the natural consequence of her being. When a man experiences this kind of destruction, he is given an opportunity, the opportunity to evolve. The destruction of his ego is painful, yes, but it is also the invitation to rise above it. This is where true individuation begins. To move from a place of ego-driven self-worth to a deeper understanding of self requires vulnerability. It requires breaking down the walls that have kept him separated from the truest, most authentic version of himself. For some men, this is a process they may never fully embark upon. Their fear of vulnerability and their attachment to their ego will prevent them from embracing the change the spiritually awakened woman offers. And that is their choice. But for those who are brave enough to step into the unknown, to face the fear of inadequacy, to confront the parts of themselves they have long suppressed, the journey of healing and growth can be extraordinary. The spiritually awakened woman is not a destroyer in the traditional sense. She does not break down for the sake of destruction. She is a mirror, and that mirror reflects the unconscious parts of those around her. When the average man is confronted with his own reflection, he may feel disoriented, threatened, or even devastated. But this feeling is not her doing. It is the necessary discomfort that comes with true self-discovery. It is the ego's death and the rebirth of a new self, one that is unencumbered by false beliefs and limiting narratives. She does not seek to change him. She does not demand that he be anything other than what he is. But by standing in her own power, by living in her own truth, she becomes an agent of transformation. Whether or not he takes that step is entirely up to him. The spiritually awakened woman's power lies not in what she does, but in who she is. Her authenticity is a challenge to the fragile ego, and this challenge presents the opportunity for deep, meaningful transformation. But transformation is not guaranteed. It is a choice. For those men who are willing to confront their own shadows, to surrender the need for external validation, and to face the deepest parts of themselves, the rewards of this journey are profound. But for those who cannot yet do so, the spiritually awakened woman will remain a reminder of everything they have yet to integrate. Her destruction is not final. It is a beginning of the unraveling of ego and the possibility of a more authentic existence. But only if he is ready. The spiritually awakened woman does not need to destroy the average man. She merely offers him the opportunity to destroy the illusions that keep him trapped in his own limitations. And in this invitation lies the potential for true freedom for him and for her. The spiritually awakened woman's power does not lie in her ability to dominate or control, but in her deep connection with the essence of life itself. She is a force, yes, but it is a force rooted in peace, in alignment with the universe, in a soul that has transcended the superficialities of ego and validation. This is what the average man encounters when he meets her, not a challenge of power, but a force that disturbs the very fabric of his identity. His ego, which thrives on external approval, on conquest, on the validation of his masculinity and worth, finds itself threatened by her mere presence. To understand why this destruction happens, we must first look at the nature of the ego itself. The ego is the part of us that constructs our identity, often based on the validation and approval of others. It is the mask we wear to protect ourselves, to fit in, to feel important in a world that constantly tells us we are not enough. For many men, this ego is their most prized possession. It gives them a sense of worth, of significance, of control. But the spiritually awakened woman who has surrendered the need for external validation does not rely on this ego. She does not measure herself against the world's expectations, nor does she seek to prove her value through external markers. Her essence disrupts the world of the ego. The moment she enters a man's life, he is immediately forced to confront this fragile part of himself. The part that craves validation, approval, and external recognition. And in that confrontation, he is either left with the choice to shed this ego and step into a higher form of self-awareness, or to recoil in fear, retreating back to the safety of his illusions. This process is a difficult one. For the average man who has spent his life constructing his identity around the validation of others, facing his own vulnerability is often terrifying. His ego does not want to be exposed. It does not want to be broken down. But the spiritually awakened woman's presence forces this exposure. She is not intentionally trying to break him, but her very being, her sense of peace, wholeness, and authenticity makes it impossible for him to remain trapped in the facade of his ego. This confrontation is inevitable. But let's delve deeper into why this confrontation can be so destructive. When a man is faced with a woman who has transcended the need for validation, he is confronted not only with her strength but with his own inadequacy. The gap between who she is and who he is becomes painfully evident. In her self-sufficiency, in her sense of inner peace, he may feel exposed, unworthy, and incomplete. The very idea that she does not need him, that she is already whole and fulfilled, shakes the foundation of his identity. His worth in the eyes of his ego is directly tied to the role he plays in someone else's life, and the spiritually awakened woman does not need him in that way. Her existence does not require him to fill any gaps in her. For many men, this can be deeply disorienting. He may feel as though he has been rendered useless or irrelevant. In a world where success, achievement, and validation come through external means, the woman who is self-sufficient, who operates from a place of inner strength, becomes a mirror to his own insecurity. He sees in her a reflection of everything he has not yet integrated, the parts of himself that are still dependent on the approval of others, the parts of himself that are still afraid to face the shadow of his own fears and limitations. The destruction that occurs is not physical, nor is it a calculated attack. It is a psychological unraveling. It is the ego's desperate attempt to hold on to its sense of control and identity in the face of a woman who operates outside the confines of those same limitations. The spiritually awakened woman does not need to prove herself, does not need to fight for her worth. She simply is. And this being is the essence that challenges the fragile ego of the average man. The ego is built on external pillars: success, power, status, validation from others. But the spiritually awakened woman who has transcended this need does not live in that same world. Her power is not derived from others. It is self-contained. And in the presence of her self-sufficiency, the average man must either come to terms with his own need for validation or remain trapped in the cycle of ego-driven insecurity. For the spiritually awakened woman, the destruction is not about creating harm. It is about revealing what is often hidden, the parts of the man's psyche that are still bound by the chains of ego. She does not intentionally try to break him. She simply stands in her own truth. Her mere existence forces him to see what he has long tried to avoid, that true power comes not from control over others, but from self-awareness, self-acceptance, and the integration of all parts of oneself, including the shadow. For the average man, this may be too much to bear. The process of individuation, of facing one's own darkness, of confronting the insecurities that lie beneath the surface, is not easy. But for those who are willing to step into this space of vulnerability, there is the potential for transformation. The spiritually awakened woman offers an opportunity to evolve, to step beyond the limitations of the ego and into a more authentic version of oneself. But this transformation requires courage, humility, and a willingness to face the parts of oneself that are uncomfortable, that have been buried for too long. In the end, the spiritually awakened woman does not destroy the average man, but she offers him the chance to destroy his illusions. She provides a mirror that reflects the truth of who he is, and in that reflection lies the potential for healing. Whether he chooses to embrace this opportunity or retreat from it is his decision. But for those who are brave enough to face their shadows, to shed the ego's need for validation, there is the possibility of growth not just for them, but for the world around them as well. The spiritually awakened woman does not need to destroy. She simply invites others to destroy the illusions that have kept them trapped. And in this process, both she and the man have the potential to rise to a higher state of being.